The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Tokyo's Narita International Airport as the British Airways aircraft carrying the Earl and Countess of Wessex touched down on Japanese soil. Prince Edward stepped out first, his navy suit perfectly pressed despite the long flight from London. Sophie followed close behind, her elegant cream-colored dress catching the gentle breeze as she descended the aircraft steps with practiced grace. The couple had arrived in Japan for what would become one of their most memorable overseas visits, marking a significant milestone in British-Japanese diplomatic relations. This was not their first visit to the land of the rising sun, but it would prove to be their most impactful, filled with moments that would be captured by photographers and remembered by both nations for years to come. As they walked across the red carpet that had been rolled out for their arrival, Edward and Sophie exchanged warm smiles with the Japanese officials who had gathered to welcome them. The formality of the moment was balanced by genuine warmth, something that would characterize their entire visit. Sophie's choice to wear a dress designed by a British designer with subtle Japanese-inspired elements had not gone unnoticed by the fashion photographers present, and it would later be praised as a thoughtful gesture of cultural appreciation. Their first official engagement took them to the British Embassy in Tokyo, where Ambassador Julia Longbottom welcomed them with traditional British tea served alongside Japanese confectionaries. The combination represented exactly what this visit was meant to achieve, a bridge between two cultures that respected both traditions. Edward, known for his genuine interest in different cultures, immediately began asking detailed questions about the preparation methods of the Japanese sweets. The conversation flowed easily as they discussed the agenda for the coming days. Sophie, who had spent considerable time preparing for this visit by learning basic Japanese phrases, impressed everyone present when she thanked the embassy staff in their native language. Her pronunciation was careful and respectful, earning appreciative nods from the Japanese members of the diplomatic team. From the embassy, their motorcade traveled through the bustling streets of Tokyo toward their first major engagement at the Imperial Palace. The contrast between the ancient palace grounds and the modern cityscape surrounding it provided a perfect metaphor for Japan itself, a nation that had masterfully balanced tradition with innovation. As their car passed through the palace gates, both Edward and Sophie could be seen looking out the windows with obvious fascination. The Imperial Palace meeting represented the highest level of diplomatic protocol. Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako had agreed to receive the British royal couple in a private audience, something that required months of careful planning and coordination between both royal households. The significance of this meeting was not lost on anyone present, as it represented the strong bonds between the British and Japanese royal families. Entering the palace's reception hall, Edward and Sophie were struck by the understated elegance of their surroundings. The room was decorated with traditional Japanese art, including scrolls featuring delicate cherry blossom paintings and ancient calligraphy. Fresh flowers have been arranged according to the principles of ikebana, creating a sense of natural harmony that immediately put everyone at ease. The formal introductions were conducted with careful attention to protocol, but the atmosphere quickly became more relaxed as the four royals discovered shared interests. Emperor Naruhito, known for his academic background and international perspective, engaged Edward in a discussion about environmental conservation efforts in both countries. Meanwhile, Empress Masako, who had lived abroad for many years, found common ground with Sophie in their experiences of adapting to royal life. One of the most touching moments of their meeting occurred when Empress Masako presented Sophie with a beautifully crafted silk scarf featuring a design inspired by traditional Japanese textiles. The gift had been personally selected by the Empress, who had learned of Sophie's interest in supporting British textile artisans. In return, Sophie presented a piece of English bone china decorated with roses from the gardens at Bagshot Park, the couple's home. The exchange of gifts was captured by the official photographer, but it was the genuine smiles and warm conversation that truly characterized the meeting. These were not just diplomatic gestures, but real connections being formed between people who understood the unique responsibilities and pressures of royal life. Following their meeting with the Emperor and Empress, Edward and Sophie were given a private tour of sections of the Imperial Palace Gardens that are rarely seen by visitors. Their guide, a master gardener who had tended these grounds for over 30 years, explained the philosophy behind Japanese garden design with passion and expertise that captivated both visitors. The gardens presented a study in contrasts, carefully controlled nature that appeared completely natural, ancient techniques applied to create timeless beauty. Edward, who had always been interested in landscape design, asked detailed questions about the pruning techniques used on the centuries-old pine trees. Sophie was particularly drawn to a small tea house nestled beside a koi pond, where she spent several minutes watching the colorful fish swim in lazy circles. The photographer accompanying their tour captured a particularly memorable image of the couple standing beside a stone bridge over a stream. In the photograph, they appear completely relaxed, pointing at something in the water while sharing a private laugh. This image would later become one of the most widely circulated photographs from their entire visit, perfectly capturing the genuine enjoyment they found in these cultural discoveries. Their next destination was the nearby East Gardens, where they participated in a traditional tea ceremony conducted by a master practitioner of the art. The ceremony took place in an authentic tea house that had been constructed using traditional techniques, without a single nail in its entire structure. The attention to detail in every aspect of the ceremony impressed both visitors, from the careful selection of the tea bowls to the precise movements required to prepare and serve the tea. Sophie, who had been studying the tea ceremony traditions before their visit, surprised everyone by demonstrating her knowledge of the proper etiquette for receiving tea. Her careful attention to the prescribed movements and her obvious respect for the ceremony earned appreciative comments from their host, who later remarked that it was rare to see visitors show such genuine understanding of the cultural significance behind the ritual. Edward, meanwhile, was fascinated by the philosophical aspects of the tea ceremony, particularly the concept of ichigo-ichi, the idea that each encounter is unique and will never be repeated exactly. He engaged their host in a thoughtful discussion about how this philosophy influenced Japanese approaches to hospitality and human relationships. The ceremony concluded with the traditional sharing of wagashi, delicate sweets designed to complement the bitter taste of the matcha tea. The particular sweets chosen for this occasion were shaped like cherry blossoms, despite the season, as a symbol of the beauty and fleeting nature of this special visit. As they prepared to leave the palace grounds, Edward and Sophie were presented with a gift from Emperor Naruhito, a set of books featuring photographs and poetry celebrating the changing seasons in Japan. The emperor had personally inscribed the books with messages expressing his hope that their friendship would continue to grow like the gardens they had just visited. The drive from the imperial palace to their next engagement took them through some of Tokyo's most historic districts. Their route had been carefully planned to showcase different aspects of Japanese culture, from ancient temples to modern business districts. Sophie could be seen taking photographs through the car window, capturing images of daily life in Tokyo that fascinated her. Their evening concluded with a private dinner at a traditional restaurant that had been serving kaiseki cuisine for over 200 years. The restaurant, located in a historic building in the Ginza district, provided an intimate setting for their first evening in Japan. The meal consisted of multiple courses, each designed to showcase seasonal ingredients prepared according to techniques passed down through generations. The restaurant's owner, a third-generation proprietor, personally welcomed Edward and Sophie and explained the philosophy behind kaiseki dining. Each dish was presented as a work of art, with colors and arrangements designed to reflect the beauty of nature. The explanation of each course became a cultural education that both visitors clearly enjoyed. Sophie was particularly impressed by a dish featuring locally sourced mushrooms arranged to resemble a miniature forest scene, complete with edible moss made from ground herbs. Edward showed great interest in the sake pairings that accompanied each course, engaging their host in discussions about the brewing processes and regional variations in Japanese rice wine. The evening's conversation ranged from serious discussions about trade relationships between Britain and Japan to lighter topics about family life and personal interests. The relaxed atmosphere allowed both couples to connect on a personal level, laying the groundwork for relationships that would extend beyond this official visit. As they returned to their hotel that evening, both Edward and Sophie reflected on the remarkable first day of their visit. The combination of formal protocol and genuine cultural exchange had created exactly the kind of diplomatic success that both governments had hoped for. More importantly, they had begun to form personal connections with their Japanese host that would influence their approach to the rest of their visit. The hotel staff had prepared a traditional Japanese welcome in their suite, including fresh flowers arranged according to ikebana principles and a selection of local fruits presented in handcrafted wooden boxes. These thoughtful touches demonstrated the level of care that had gone into planning every aspect of their stay. Before retiring for the evening, Edward and Sophie spent time reviewing their schedule for the following day and discussing their impressions of their first encounters with Japanese culture. Both expressed excitement about the educational visits planned for the next day, including stops at a traditional craft workshop and a modern technology center that would showcase Japan's unique ability to honor its past while embracing the future. Their conversation that evening revealed how much they had already learned and how much more they were eager to discover. This enthusiasm would characterize their entire visit and contribute to making it one of their most successful overseas engagements. The photographs taken throughout this first day would later be compiled into an official record of the visit, but it was the genuine connections and cultural understanding they had begun to develop that would prove to be the most lasting legacy of their time in Japan. The combination of formal diplomacy and personal cultural exchange had created the perfect foundation for the days ahead. As Tokyo settled into evening around them, Edward and Sophie prepared for sleep, knowing that their first day in Japan had exceeded all expectations and set the stage for what would become a truly memorable visit filled with moments that would strengthen the bonds between their two nations. The second day of their visit began with the gentle sound of temple bells drifting across Tokyo in the early morning hours. Edward and Sophie had arranged for an early start, eager to experience as much of Japanese culture as possible during their time in the country. Their first destination was the ancient Sensoji Temple in the Asakusa district, one of Tokyo's oldest and most significant Buddhist temples. Arriving at the temple complex, they were greeted by the head priest, who had prepared a special blessing ceremony in their honor. The approach to the temple through the Nakamai's shopping street provided them with their first real taste of traditional Japanese commerce. Hundreds of small shops lined the pathway, selling everything from traditional crafts to modern souvenirs, all maintaining the architectural style that had characterized this area for centuries. Sophie was immediately drawn to a shop specializing in traditional Japanese fans, where an elderly craftsman demonstrated the intricate process of hand-painting delicate designs onto silk. The artist, who had been practicing his craft for over 50 years, created a custom fan for Sophie featuring cherry blossoms and the British rose intertwined in a design that symbolized the friendship between their two countries. Edward, meanwhile, became fascinated by a demonstration of traditional woodworking techniques at a shop that specialized in handcrafted combs and hair ornaments. The craftsman explained how different types of wood were selected for their specific properties and how the tools used in the process had remained virtually unchanged for generations. The attention to detail and respect for traditional methods resonated strongly with Edward's own appreciation for craftsmanship and heritage. The temple ceremony itself was a deeply moving experience for both visitors. The head priest, speaking through an interpreter, explained the significance of each element of the blessing ritual. Incense filled the air as prayers were offered for peace and friendship between nations. Edward and Sophie participated respectfully in the ceremony, following the guidance of their hosts and showing genuine reverence for the sacred space they were visiting. Following the temple visit, they made their way to a traditional craft workshop in the nearby district of Ueno. The workshop specialized in the creation of traditional Japanese dolls, an art form that requires years of training to master. The master craftsman, designated as a living national treasure by the Japanese government, personally welcomed the royal couple and demonstrated the incredibly detailed process involved in creating a single doll. The workshop was filled with works in various stages of completion, from rough wooden forms to exquisitely detailed figures wearing miniature kimonos made from the finest silk. Sophie was amazed by the tiny stitches required to create the clothing for the dolls, while Edward was fascinated by the carving techniques used to create facial expressions that seemed almost lifelike. The craftsman presented them with a specially created piece, a pair of dolls dressed in traditional court clothing that represented the friendship between Britain and Japan. The male doll wore clothing inspired by traditional Japanese formal wear, while the female doll's kimono incorporated subtle patterns that referenced British floral motifs. The gift required several months to complete and represented countless hours of meticulous work. Their next stop brought them into contact with a completely different aspect of Japanese culture. A visit to the headquarters of a major technology company that had been instrumental in developing some of Japan's most innovative products. The contrast between the ancient traditions they had experienced in the morning and the cutting-edge technology they encountered in the afternoon perfectly illustrated Japan's unique ability to honor its past while embracing the future. The company's president personally guided them through research and development laboratories where scientists and engineers were working on projects that would shape the future of communication and transportation. Edward, who had always maintained an interest in technology and innovation, engaged the researchers in detailed discussions about their work and its potential applications. Sophie was particularly interested in the company's initiatives to support women in technology fields. She met with several female engineers and researchers who described their experiences working in what had traditionally been a male-dominated industry. The conversation revealed how Japanese companies were evolving to embrace diversity and create opportunities for talented individuals regardless of gender. The technology demonstration included presentations of prototype devices that would not be available to the public for several years. The researchers were clearly excited to share their work with visitors who showed genuine interest and understanding. Edward asked particularly insightful questions about the environmental impact of new technologies, a concern that resonated strongly with the Japanese researchers who were working to develop more sustainable solutions. The visit concluded with a presentation about the company's cultural preservation initiatives. Using advanced digital technology, they were creating detailed records of traditional Japanese arts and crafts, ensuring that these skills would not be lost as older masters passed away. This fusion of ancient wisdom and modern technology exemplified the Japanese approach to progress that honored the past while preparing for the future. Lunch was served at the company's executive dining room, which featured a menu that combined traditional Japanese ingredients with modern cooking techniques. The meal provided an opportunity for more informal conversation about the challenges and opportunities facing both British and Japanese industries in an increasingly connected world. The afternoon brought them to one of Tokyo's most famous gardens, where they participated in a flower arranging workshop conducted by a master of ikebana. The ancient art of flower arranging required not just technical skill, but also a deep understanding of natural beauty and philosophical principles about harmony and balance. Sophie, who had always enjoyed gardening at their home in England, found herself naturally drawn to the meditative aspects of ikebana. Her instructor praised her intuitive understanding of the principles involved, particularly her ability to create arrangements that achieve balance while maintaining a sense of natural movement. Edward approached the art from a more analytical perspective, asking detailed questions about the historical development of different schools of ikebana and their philosophical foundations. His arrangement, while perhaps less naturally flowing than Sophie's, demonstrated a careful understanding of the geometric principles underlying the art form. The workshop took place in a traditional tea house surrounded by carefully maintained gardens that showcased different seasonal plantings. The setting provided inspiration for their arrangements and demonstrated how ikebana artists drew inspiration from the natural world around them. Their instructor explained how ikebana was more than just flower arranging. It was a form of meditation that required practitioners to slow down and observe the natural world with careful attention. This philosophy resonated with both visitors, who found themselves becoming more mindful of their surroundings as they worked with the flowers and branches. The completed arrangements were photographed as mementos of their experience, but the real value of the workshop lay in their deeper understanding of Japanese aesthetics and philosophy. The concepts they learned would influence how they viewed the other cultural experiences throughout their visit. Their evening engagement was a formal dinner hosted by the mayor of Tokyo at a historic restaurant that had been serving traditional cuisine since the Edo period. The restaurant, located in a beautifully preserved building, provided an elegant setting for discussions about the relationship between Tokyo and London as global cities facing similar challenges. The dinner conversation covered a wide range of topics, from urban planning and environmental sustainability to cultural exchange programs and educational partnerships. Edward and Sophie demonstrated their genuine interest in learning about Tokyo's approaches to modern urban challenges while sharing insights from London's experiences. The menu for the evening had been carefully planned to showcase seasonal ingredients from different regions of Japan. Each course was accompanied by explanations about its cultural significance and the traditional methods used in its preparation. The presentation of each dish was itself a work of art, demonstrating the Japanese principle that food should appeal to all the senses. Sophie was particularly moved by a dish that had been prepared using vegetables grown by elderly farmers in rural communities that were working to preserve traditional agricultural methods. The story behind the ingredients added depth to the dining experience and demonstrated how food could connect people across generations and geographic boundaries. Edward engaged in a fascinating discussion with the chef about the philosophy behind kaiseki cuisine and its emphasis on seasonal awareness and natural harmony. The conversation revealed how Japanese culinary traditions embodied many of the same principles found in other traditional Japanese arts. The evening included a traditional musical performance by masters of the koto, a traditional Japanese string instrument. The haunting melodies created an atmosphere of contemplation and beauty that provided the perfect accompaniment to the extraordinary cuisine. During the performance, Sophie was visibly moved by the emotional depth of the music. The performers later explained that the pieces they had chosen specifically reflected themes of friendship and natural beauty, making the experience even more meaningful for their international guests. The dinner concluded with a ceremony in which Edward and Sophie were presented with certificates recognizing them as honorary citizens of Tokyo. The ceremony was conducted with appropriate formality, but also genuine warmth, reflecting the real connections that had been formed throughout the day. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, the mayor presented them with a collection of photographs documenting Tokyo's transformation over the past century. The gift was intended to help them understand how the city had evolved while maintaining its essential character, a theme that had run throughout their entire day of cultural experiences. The drive back to their hotel took them through different districts of Tokyo, allowing them to observe the city's nightlife and experience how the urban landscape changed after dark. The combination of traditional paper lanterns and modern neon signs created a visual tapestry that perfectly captured Tokyo's unique character. Before retiring for the evening, Edward and Sophie spent time reviewing the gifts they had received and discussing the remarkable experiences of their second day in Japan. The depth of cultural exchange they had experienced exceeded their expectations and provided them with insights that would influence their understanding of Japanese culture for years to come. Their conversation that evening reflected on the extraordinary hospitality they had received and the genuine connections they had formed with their Japanese hosts. Both expressed amazement at the level of thought and preparation that had gone into every aspect of their visit, from the smallest details of protocol to the selection of cultural experiences that would be most meaningful. The photographs taken throughout the day would become treasured records of their visit, but the memories and understanding they had gained would prove to be far more valuable. Their second day in Japan had deepened their appreciation for a culture that successfully balanced tradition with innovation, creating a model that held valuable lessons for people around the world. The third day of their Japanese adventure brought Edward and Sophie to the historic city of Kyoto, the former imperial capital that served as the cultural heart of Japan for over 1,000 years. The morning began with a journey on the famous bullet train, an experience that perfectly demonstrated Japan's technological achievements while providing stunning views of Mount Fuji in the distance. As their train glided silently through the Japanese countryside at speeds that still amazed international visitors, both Edward and Sophie pressed their faces to the windows like excited children, watching the landscape transform from urban Tokyo to rural farmland and then to the outskirts of Kyoto. The efficiency and comfort of the journey impressed them both, and Edward engaged the train conductor in a conversation about the engineering marvels that made such smooth, high-speed travel possible. Arriving at Kyoto Station, they were greeted by local officials and a small group of traditional musicians playing ancient melodies on wooden flutes and small drums. The music seemed to transport them back in time, preparing them for a day spent exploring Japan's most treasured historical sites and cultural traditions. Their first destination was the Golden Kinkakuji Temple, one of Japan's most photographed and beloved landmarks. The three-story pavilion, covered entirely in gold leaf, appeared to float on the surface of the surrounding pond like a vision from an ancient fairy tale. The morning light reflecting off the gold created an almost magical atmosphere that left both visitors speechless with wonder. The head monk of the temple personally welcomed them and explained the history of the building, which had served as a retirement villa for a shogun before being converted into a Buddhist temple. The stories of the temple's destruction by fire and its careful reconstruction using traditional methods fascinated Edward, who asked detailed questions about the craftsmanship involved in applying the gold leaf and maintaining the building's pristine appearance. Sophie was drawn to the gardens surrounding the temple, which had been designed according to ancient principles to create perfect harmony between the natural and built environments. Every stone, tree, and pathway had been carefully placed to create views that changed with the seasons and the time of day. The garden designer who guided their tour explained how the layout had been planned to symbolize the Buddhist journey toward enlightenment. The temple visit included a private tea ceremony conducted in a small pavilion overlooking the pond. The ceremony was performed by elderly monks who had practiced this ritual for decades, and their movements had a fluid grace that seemed almost choreographed. Edward and Sophie participated with obvious reverence, understanding that they were experiencing something that had remained essentially unchanged for centuries. Following their temple visit, they traveled to the historic Gion district, famous as the home of geisha culture and traditional wooden architecture. Walking through narrow streets lined with wooden buildings that housed tea houses and traditional restaurants, they felt as though they had stepped back in time to the height of Imperial Japan. Their guide for this portion of the visit was a retired gaiko, the Kyoto term for geisha, who had spent her career preserving and performing the traditional arts of dance, music, and conversation that defined this unique profession. She explained the rigorous training required to master these skills and the important role that gaiko played in preserving Japanese cultural traditions. At a traditional okaya tea house, they were treated to a private performance that included classical dance, shamisen music, and the complex conversation games that had entertained Japan's elite for generations. Sophie was particularly fascinated by the intricate costumes and the subtle meanings conveyed through fan movements and dance positions. The performance concluded with an interactive session where both Edward and Sophie attempted to learn basic dance movements and play traditional games. Their efforts, while not technically perfect, were met with encouraging laughter and applause from their hosts. The experience provided them with a deeper understanding of the discipline and artistry required to master these traditional forms. Lunch was served at a restaurant that had been continuously operated by the same family for 12 generations. The building itself was a masterpiece of traditional architecture, featuring tatama floors, sliding paper doors, and a central courtyard garden that brought natural light into the dining spaces. The meal consisted of kaiseki cuisine that showcased ingredients and cooking methods specific to the Kyoto region. The restaurant's current owner, the 12th generation of his family to run the establishment, personally served their meal and shared stories about famous historical figures who had dined in the same rooms. The continuity of tradition represented by this family business impressed both visitors, who understood the dedication required to maintain such high standards across so many generations. The afternoon brought them to one of Kyoto's most important cultural institutions, a workshop where traditional kimonos were created using methods that have been passed down through generations of artisans. The process of creating a single kimono could take months or even years, involving specialists in silk production, dyeing, weaving, and sewing who each contributed their expertise to the final product. Sophie was amazed by the complexity of the designs and the mathematical precision required to create patterns that would align perfectly when the fabric was cut and sewn. The master craftsman demonstrated the traditional dyeing techniques that created colors so vibrant and deep that they seemed to glow with inner light. Edward was fascinated by the business aspects of maintaining traditional crafts in a modern economy. His conversations with the workshop owners revealed the challenges they faced in training new artisans and finding markets for products that required such intensive labor and traditional skills. The visit included a demonstration of silk production, from the cultivation of silkworms to the spinning of thread and the weaving of fabric. The entire process required careful attention to temperature, humidity, and timing that demonstrated the deep understanding of natural processes that traditional artisans possessed. As a special honor, both Edward and Sophie were invited to try their hand at some of the simpler techniques involved in kimono decoration. Their attempts at applying traditional patterns using stencils and brushes provided them with hands-on appreciation for the skill required to create these masterpieces. Their next destination was the famous bamboo grove of Arashiyama, where thousands of towering bamboo stalks created a natural cathedral that filtered sunlight into an ethereal green glow. Walking through the paths that wound through this natural wonder, both visitors experienced a sense of peace and connection with nature that was unlike anything they had encountered before. The sound of wind moving through the bamboo created a natural symphony that the local government had officially recognized as one of Japan's most important soundscapes to be preserved. Standing quietly in the grove, Edward and Sophie understood why this place had inspired poets and artists for centuries. Their guide explained the cultural significance of bamboo in Japanese life, from its practical uses in construction and crafts to its symbolic meaning in art and literature. The resilience and flexibility of bamboo had made it a metaphor for the ideal human character, strong enough to withstand storms, but flexible enough to bend without breaking. The grove also contained several small temples and shrines where visitors could offer prayers and make wishes. Edward and Sophie participated in these traditions with appropriate respect, leaving offerings and taking moments for private reflection in the sacred space. Photography in the bamboo grove created some of the most striking images of their entire visit. The interplay of light and shadow, combined with the natural geometry created by the vertical bamboo stalks, provided perfect background for portraits that captured both the beauty of the location and the obvious wonder of the visitors. Their evening in Kyoto began with a visit to a traditional ryokan, a Japanese inn that provided an authentic experience of traditional Japanese hospitality. The ryokan where they would spend the night had been operating for over 300 years and had hosted members of the imperial family, as well as important foreign dignitaries throughout its long history. The welcome ceremony at the ryokan followed protocols that had been established centuries earlier. Edward and Sophie were greeted by staff wearing traditional clothing and escorted to their rooms along corridors decorated with priceless artworks and antique furnishings. Their accommodation featured tatami floor mats, futon beds that could be arranged in the traditional manner, and views of carefully maintained gardens. Before dinner, they participated in the traditional ritual of bathing in the Ryokan's hot springs. The mineral-rich waters, heated by natural geothermal activity, were believed to have healing properties and had been used for therapeutic purposes for generations. The experience of soaking in the outdoor pools while viewing the mountains in the distance provided both relaxation and a deeper connection with the natural environment. Dinner was served in a private dining room, where they could experience the full ritual of a traditional kaiseki meal in an authentic setting. The courses were timed to coincide with the changing light outside their windows, creating a dining experience that connected them with the natural rhythms of day and night. The meal began with seasonal appetizers that featured ingredients foraged from the surrounding mountains and prepared according to recipes that had been refined over generations. Each course was accompanied by explanations of its cultural significance and the traditional methods used in its preparation. Sophie was particularly impressed by a course that featured vegetables carved into shapes that represented different aspects of the autumn season. The artistry involved in creating these edible sculptures demonstrated the Japanese principle that food should be beautiful as well as nourishing. Edward engaged their hosts in discussions about the philosophical foundations of kaiseki cuisine and its connections to Buddhist principles of mindfulness and appreciation for the gifts of nature. These conversations deepened their understanding of how food served as a connection between the physical and spiritual aspects of Japanese culture. The evening concluded with a private concert performed by masters of traditional Japanese instruments. The music, played on instruments made from natural materials using traditional techniques, created an atmosphere of contemplation and beauty that perfectly complemented their surroundings. As they prepared for sleep on traditional futon mattresses arranged on tatami floors, Edward and Sophie reflected on the incredible depth of cultural experience they had encountered during their day in Kyoto. The city had provided them with insights into Japanese history, philosophy, and artistic achievement that exceeded their expectations. Their conversations that evening revealed how much they had learned about the Japanese approach to preserving tradition while adapting to modern challenges. The examples they had seen throughout the day demonstrated how cultural heritage could remain vibrant and relevant when it was actively practiced and shared with new generations. The experience of sleeping in a traditional ryokan provided them with their most authentic taste of historical Japanese life. The simplicity and elegance of their surroundings created an atmosphere of peace that prepared them for what would be their final day in this remarkable country. The photographs and memories from their day in Kyoto would become among their most treasured souvenirs from the visit. More importantly, the cultural understanding they had gained would influence their appreciation for Japanese art, philosophy, and traditions for the rest of their lives. Their time in Kyoto had provided them with a deep appreciation for a culture that had achieved remarkable continuity while remaining dynamic and creative. The final day of their remarkable journey through Japan began with the gentle sounds of morning prayers drifting across the Ryokan grounds as Buddhist monks from a nearby temple conducted their daily rituals. Edward and Sophie woke naturally with the sunrise, having found the simple elegance of their traditional accommodations surprisingly conducive to peaceful sleep. Their morning routine followed the rhythms established by generations of Ryokan guests. After bathing in the therapeutic hot springs once more, they dressed in the yukata robes provided by the inn and joined their host for a traditional Japanese breakfast served on lacquered trays in their private dining room. The breakfast itself was a revelation, a carefully balanced collection of small dishes that included grilled fish, pickled vegetables, miso soup, and perfectly seasoned rice. Each component had been prepared to complement the others, creating a meal that was both nutritionally complete and aesthetically beautiful. Sophie remarked that the presentation of the food was so artistic that she almost hesitated to disturb it by eating. Edward engaged their server in conversation about the nutritional philosophy behind traditional Japanese breakfast, learning how the combination of ingredients was designed to provide sustained energy throughout the day. The discussion revealed the deep connection between Japanese cuisine and traditional medicine, with foods chosen not just for taste, but for their health-promoting properties. After breakfast, they participated in a morning meditation session led by a Zen master from the local temple. The session took place in a garden pavilion surrounded by carefully raked gravel and precisely placed stones that created patterns designed to promote contemplation and inner peace. The meditation instruction was provided through gentle guidance rather than rigid rules, allowing both visitors to experience the practice in their own way. Sophie found herself naturally drawn to the peaceful atmosphere, while Edward appreciated the philosophical foundations underlying the practice. Both emerged from the session feeling refreshed and centered for their final day of cultural exploration. Their departure from the Ryokan was marked by a formal farewell ceremony conducted by the entire staff. The traditional bowing and expressions of gratitude demonstrated the genuine warmth that their hosts had felt toward their international guests. The Ryokan's owner presented them with handwritten scrolls featuring calligraphy that expressed wishes for their safe travels and future happiness. The journey back to Tokyo provided opportunities to observe the Japanese countryside from a different perspective as they traveled through regions they had not seen during their arrival. The autumn colors were at their peak, creating landscapes that looked like traditional paintings come alive. Both Edward and Sophie spent considerable time photographing the changing scenery outside their train windows. Their final cultural engagement in Japan took place at a special exhibition that had been organized specifically to showcase the breadth and depth of Japanese artistic achievement. The exhibition, held at the Tokyo National Museum, featured masterpieces from different periods of Japanese history, providing a comprehensive overview of the cultural traditions they had experienced throughout their visit. The museum's director personally guided them through the exhibition, explaining the historical context and artistic significance of each piece. The collection included ancient Buddhist sculptures, medieval scroll paintings, traditional ceramics, and contemporary works that demonstrated how Japanese artists continued to innovate while honoring their cultural heritage. Sophie was particularly moved by a section featuring traditional textiles that showcased the incredible skill of Japanese weavers and dyers. The complexity of the patterns and the subtle variations in color demonstrated artistic achievements that rivaled any in the world. She spent considerable time examining the techniques used to create these masterpieces, comparing them with the methods she had observed during their workshop visits. Edward was drawn to a collection of traditional armor and weapons that demonstrated the technical expertise of Japanese metalworkers. The craftsmanship involved in creating these functional artworks impressed him deeply, particularly the way decorative elements had been integrated into pieces designed for practical use in battle. The exhibition included interactive displays that allowed visitors to experience traditional Japanese arts firsthand. Edward and Sophie tried their hand at calligraphy under the guidance of a master who had spent decades perfecting this ancient art form. Their attempts, while clearly those of beginners, were met with encouragement and gentle correction that helped them appreciate the discipline required to master such skills. A special section of the exhibition had been created to document the cultural exchange between Britain and Japan throughout history. This display included gifts that had been exchanged between the royal families of both countries, trade goods that had traveled between the nations, and artistic works that showed mutual influence between British and Japanese artists. The centerpiece of this section was a magnificent silk tapestry that had been created specifically to commemorate their visit. The work, which had required months to complete, featured traditional Japanese motifs interwoven with British symbols to create a visual representation of the friendship between the two nations. Their final official engagement was a farewell luncheon hosted by the Japanese foreign minister at his official residence. The guest list included many of the people they had met throughout their visit, creating an opportunity to reconnect with new friends and reflect on shared experiences. The conversation during lunch ranged across the many topics they had explored together, from traditional arts and cultural preservation to modern challenges facing both countries. Edward and Sophie demonstrated how much they had learned during their visit, asking thoughtful questions and sharing observations that revealed their deep appreciation for Japanese culture. The foreign minister presented them with a collection of books and artwork that would allow them to continue learning about Japan after their return to Britain. The gifts included works by contemporary Japanese authors, art books featuring traditional and modern Japanese artists, and recordings of the traditional music they had experienced throughout their visit. In return, Edward and Sophie presented gifts representing British culture and craftsmanship, including pieces created by British artisans specifically for this exchange. The reciprocal nature of the gift-giving reflected the mutual respect and friendship that had developed throughout their visit. The luncheon concluded with formal toasts that expressed hopes for continued friendship and cultural exchange between the two nations. Both Edward and Sophie spoke briefly, expressing their gratitude for the extraordinary hospitality they had received and their commitment to sharing what they had learned with people back in Britain. The afternoon provided time for private reflection and final shopping at carefully selected stores that featured the highest quality Japanese crafts and artistic works. Their purchases included pieces for their personal collection, as well as gifts for family members and friends who had not been able to share this remarkable experience. Sophie selected several pieces of traditional pottery and a small collection of silk textiles that would serve as permanent reminders of the artistic traditions they had encountered. Edward chose books about Japanese philosophy and culture that would allow him to deepen his understanding of the concepts they had explored during their visit. Their final cultural experience was a private viewing of a traditional no-theater performance, one of Japan's most refined and ancient dramatic art forms. The performance took place in an intimate setting that allowed them to appreciate the subtle movements and haunting vocal techniques that characterize this highly stylized art form. The No performance told a story of love and loss that transcended cultural boundaries, demonstrating how great art could communicate universal human experiences regardless of language or cultural background. The combination of music, movement, and poetic language created an emotional impact that moved both visitors deeply. Following the performance, they met with the actors and musicians who explained the years of training required to master No techniques. The dedication of these artists to preserving and performing traditional culture impressed Edward and Sophie, who understood the challenges involved in maintaining such demanding artistic standards. Their final evening in Japan was spent at a farewell dinner hosted by Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako at the Imperial Palace. The intimate gathering included only their closest hosts from throughout the visit, creating an atmosphere of warmth and friendship that perfectly captured the spirit of their entire journey. The dinner conversation reflected on the experiences they had shared and the relationships they had formed. Both the Emperor and Empress expressed their hopes that Edward and Sophie would return to Japan in the future, and that the cultural exchange begun during this visit would continue to grow and develop. The Emperor presented them with a final gift, a pair of ancient poems written on handmade paper and mounted in traditional scroll format. The poems, which spoke of friendship and the beauty of cultural exchange, had been selected specifically to commemorate their visit and the bonds that had been formed between their families. Sophie was moved to tears by the thoughtfulness of this final gift and the genuine warmth that had characterized their entire visit. Edward expressed his amazement at the depth of cultural experience they had been privileged to enjoy and his gratitude for the patience and generosity of their Japanese hosts. The evening concluded with a traditional ceremony in which Edward and Sophie planted cherry tree saplings in the Imperial Palace gardens. These trees would serve as living memorials to their visit, growing and flourishing as symbols of the friendship between Britain and Japan. As they prepared to leave for the airport the following morning, Edward and Sophie spent their final hours in Japan reviewing the extraordinary collection of photographs, gifts, and memories they had accumulated. The depth and richness of their cultural experience exceeded anything they had imagined when they first planned this visit. Their departure from Narita Airport was marked by the same formality and warmth that had characterized their arrival. Japanese officials who had become friends over the course of their visit gathered to see them off, creating an emotional farewell that reflected the genuine connections that had been formed. The flight home provided opportunities for reflection on what had been one of their most meaningful overseas visits. Both Edward and Sophie understood that they had experienced something far beyond typical diplomatic protocol. They had been privileged to engage deeply with one of the world's most sophisticated and beautiful cultures. The photographs from their visit would be carefully preserved and shared with the British public as a record of successful cultural diplomacy. More importantly, the understanding and appreciation they had developed would influence their future work and their personal perspectives for years to come. Their return to Britain brought requests for interviews and presentations about their experiences in Japan. Both Edward and Sophie embraced these opportunities to share what they had learned and to promote greater understanding between British and Japanese peoples. The cultural exchange initiated during their visit would continue through various programs and partnerships that grew out of the relationships they had formed. Educational exchanges, artistic collaborations, and trade partnerships would all benefit from the personal connections established during their remarkable journey. The memories of their time in Japan would remain among their most treasured experiences, providing ongoing inspiration for their work and their personal lives. The combination of ancient wisdom and modern innovation they had witnessed offered valuable lessons for people facing challenges anywhere in the world. Years later, they would still speak with obvious emotion about the warmth of their reception and the depth of cultural understanding they had been privileged to experience. Their visit had demonstrated the power of personal diplomacy and cultural exchange to build bridges between nations and peoples. The cherry trees they had planted in the Imperial Palace Gardens would continue to bloom each spring, serving as enduring symbols of the friendship between two nations and the remarkable journey that had brought them together in mutual understanding and respect.